if you then move on to the issue, what will they use the money for? And then we know, on the whole, they use the money for things that European peoples don't want to use tax money for. This is why we have so much money paid out again from Brussels. The money that these countries paid to Brussels, they get it back, but it's according to rules settled in Brussels. And when you go into this, you find that usually interest groups who manage to get hold of that money. And they know, these groups, that if this had been left to the British Parliament or the Swedish Parliament to do, they wouldn't have done that. So Brussels, the whole apparatus, has been used to circumvent democracy and make sure that by lobbying and all these matters, you get money you shouldn't have had. You got it against the will of the people. Then you have another point, that there is a crisis in the Eurozone, which virtually everyone who had any knowledge about knew would happen. And we even have the former President of the Commission, Romano Prodi, writing in the Financial Times. So I'm not accusing him of having said, he said it himself, you can go and look at it, that yes, of course we knew that this would lead to a crisis. It was all planned. We need crisis to move forward. And this is very often said. It's only in crisis that the European Union moves forward. What do we mean by moving forward? More power to Brussels. It's very difficult to do that, because on the whole, the various power groups in the various member states don't want that. So it's only when there's crisis you feel you have to stand up, you have to be solidaric. There are all sorts of words used for the purpose. And so you need crisis. Then you cannot act in the long run. You have to solve this problem now, and then you quickly get new rules established, and those rules inevitably mean that power is taken from national governments and parliaments and moved to Brussels, where they end up not in the European Parliament as people like to think, but they end up in the establishment of the European Union. This is another extremely strong argument against it. But when you look at the Eurozone problem, you also find that, yes, it is true that if you have a common currency for an area which is so heterogeneous, you will find that a monetary policy that fits every country is impossible. Ordinary logic said. No one would say against that. That is the truth. So what can you do? Well, you run some sort of average monetary policy, and it could lead to overheating in Greece or Ireland or Portugal and whatnot. It could lead to a long period of unemployment, as in Germany, until quite recently. And you say that, well, they have to adjust. If they find their wages are too high, well, by all means lower them. If you need more inflation to raise the price level, have some inflation and then stop it, and so on. And then when you hear that being said, you're here, but surely that isn't so easy. Isn't that what we've been failing to do since the early 1970s? We're always in the wrong situation and so on. So what do you do then? Well, everyone knows you have to have fiscal policy. You have to use taxation and public expenditure so that you can make up for the deficiencies of the monetary policy. But that is in the hands of the local member state governments. Now it has to be moved to Brussels. Now, today you could say that Brussels gets about 1% of GDP. Now, if you want to run fiscal policy, then you find that you would need to increase public expenditure by maybe 3% of GDP within the next 12 months. That is what's being done in member countries. Then you can't have just 1%. And it's not enough with 3%, because if you get 3% of GDP to Brussels, they will spend it according to rules, supporting this and that and so on. And then when you find that you have to double it, or maybe if it's the other way around, there's overheating, so you would have to withdraw 3% of GDP by lowering public expenditure, then it would be the whole thing. You need public expenditure and taxation levels of 15% or 20% of GDP to be able to let it go up and down by 3% of GDP, so to speak. That is, you will in fact shift the whole power over public sectors to Brussels and try to persuade them in language you don't understand normally that you have to do this and that. And it's a great threat for the future, for all the member countries, not just for some countries, but for all countries, that the basic thing, being a citizen in a country, is that you permit the leader, the king, a democratic parliament, or whoever is leading, that yes, we allow you to tax us and use the money for that purpose. In my own country, in Sweden, it has always said in the constitution that the right to tax is in the hands of the people, long before we had democracy. These were the farmers. The king found that he would have to enter a war in Poland or somewhere on the continent. He needs money. Then he has to tax. Then he would have to call what was in fact a parliament. How was it elected? Well, it was really the farmers saying, you go for this village. But he had to persuade them. The reason I need this money is the following. So there was something working. If this goes away from a country, there is no longer a country. It's not a nation, not a demos. You're not citizens of that country any longer. You are subjects to Brussels. And that is the end